Afternoon, everybody. Hopefully you can all hear me okay. Meg will let me know if you can't. I'm Elsa Rabin. I'm Chair of Community Land Scotland. I'm also Chair of the Isle of Egg Heritage Trust and want to welcome you all today to our webinar on community wealth building and the role that development trusts across Scotland are playing in this really important area of Scottish Government policy. And I suspect we're going to hear from all of them. Actually, community development trusts have been doing this for some time, and it's now other organisations and Scottish Government catching up with us rather than the other way around. But anyway, I'm really pleased to welcome you all today. We're going to try and keep this session to an hour, but we've given ourselves an hour and a half just in case we have lots of questions. But the plan is to try and finish at 2 if we can. I'm really pleased to welcome four great speakers today from 3 great organisations. The first, Moray Finch from Mull and Iona Community Trust, who are a long-established trust that many of you will know, and they're going to be talking about the work that MICT are doing, creating facilities for businesses and really importantly, building the evidence base about the impact of lack of affordable and available housing on businesses. Then we're going to go up to Skye and Hugh Ross and Angus Murray at the Staffing Community Trust. They've got a really broad range of projects on at the moment, including housing, eco museum and harbour development. And they're going to be talking to us a bit about how they're supporting businesses through the work they're doing. And then we're going back down south to the south of Argyll, South Cowal Community Enterprise and Lindsay Chalmers, who many of you will know. And that's going to focus specifically on the shop that the community enterprise runs there and how they've been supporting their local businesses by increasing the supplier base. So you'll see we've got our housekeeping slide up. Can you please, if you can, use the question and answer function to ask questions, and Meg will pick those up and highlight anything particular to me. We do have captions available during the session, and we are recording the session, so please keep your camera off if you don't want to be recorded. And we've also got the chat function, so please do use that as well to sort of make comments as we're going along, and share any thoughts on the presentations or any documents that you want to share. If you do require any technical support, if you can't hear me or any of the speakers well enough or see the presentations, then please message Meg Tainter at Community Land Scotland. So hopefully we're all here who should be here. So I'm going to pass over to Murray. I think Meg is controlling Murray's slides. So I'll pass over to Murray and let Murray give you background on what Mull Community and Iona Community Trust have been up to. Thanks, Murray.
Thank you, Elsa. Thank you, Meg. Thanks for asking me this afternoon. I'm flattered to be here again. I hope I can follow the starting act that you've just delivered there, Elsa. Thank you. So, Mull and Iona Community Trust, we've been in existence since 1997. So I think the arithmetic there says that we've been going for 26, 27 years. Personally, I've been here for nearly 13 years. We're involved in a whole wide range of different project activities, and I can't keep up with the slides now. We've got quite a large payroll. We've got 25 staff at any one time. I think it's a little bit more than that at the moment, with about 13 full-time equivalent at any one time. We've got lots of volunteers involved directly in steering groups, and also doing hands-on activities like working in charity shops, working out in our community forest. And we've got 430 odd members. We've got quite a bit more than that now, I think. We're just counting them up for our AGM, which is next week. So we're involved in all sorts of different activities, which are all driven by the local community as a result of their responses to the community development plan. So you can see a long but not an exhaustive list of different types of projects that we're involved with. So if we could just hold it on slide 6, please.
My apologies, Maury. For some reason, it's auto advancing, so I'll stop sharing for a moment and then I'll come back once I've solved the problem.
Okay, I was trying to keep up there, and I'm just going to get my slide back so that I can remember what I'm supposed to be saying. So I'm looking at my screen now. So we were first approached for Nonabel Park in about 2010, so just before I joined MICT. by a local businessman who was finding difficulty maintaining good relations with his neighbours because his neighbours weren't keen on his front garden being used to store building materials and scaffolding and so on. And he approached Mick to seek assistance with us providing business facilities so that he had somewhere to base his business and to operate from. So you'll see on the right hand side of the slide there, we've got a long drawn out process as a third sector organisation to try to secure public funding for a project like this. We had to demonstrate to the authorities that there was a need and demand for the facility, and we had to demonstrate to the funders that if we were able to secure the capital to build it, that it would wash its face and cover its costs, and that it would deliver the socio-economic benefits that we said it would. So we carried out quite a lot of extensive feasibility work over probably 4 or 5 years before we were then even at the starting point of trying to secure the capital to develop the project. So the first thing that we did was to complete the acquisition of the land, which we bought from Forestry and Land Scotland under the National Forest Land Scheme, as it was then called. Relatively modest cost for us. It was something like £10,000, and it's a relatively modest area. I think it's about 0.8 of a hectare. In hindsight, we were too conservative when we drew the boundary around the land, and I'll explain why shortly. But we suffice to say that we do need more land. We managed to complete the construction and secure a completion certificate from the local authority in March of 2020. And I've no doubt that anybody listening to this will be aware that there were some significant problems in the world in March 2020, which detracted from the success of the opening of the site. Notwithstanding the ravages of the pandemic, we did achieve 100% occupancy of Monorail Park by March 2022. And the truth is that we were kind of 99% occupied for most of that 2 years. It was one of the fenced compounds which stuck a little bit being empty. So just to summarise what the facilities include there, we've got 6 business units, which are 60 square metres in area. They've got a roller shutter door, and they've got a downstairs toilet and washroom. But other than that, they're just business facilities. Unfortunately, we weren't able to install a 3-phase power supply onto the site. A common thread in the project has been the difficulty in installing affordable utilities to the site. Collectively, the electricity supply and the water supply could have cost us the full cost that we eventually spent on the site. We could have spent getting on for £2 million on a super duper 3-phase electrical supply and paying Scottish Water to put in the water supply and the sewage treatment systems that we needed. But we wouldn't have been able to afford to construct any of the other facilities. So we really had to be creative and cut our cloth in terms of the power supply, which is a single-phase power supply, and the construction of private water and private sewage treatment systems. So we've got our own borehole for the site. So 6 business units. We have 8 30 square metre storage units, which are used by a combination of businesses and private individuals. Mull is quite big in rallying, so 1 or 2 of these units have got rally cars inside them, but other of the storage units are used by businesses for storing materials and equipment. We've got around about 10 fenced compounds, which are just used, as the name suggests there, for external storage of equipment and materials. And we've got 20 self-storage containers. So these are used by residents and businesses simply for off-site storage of their belongings, their materials, their equipment as required. The main driver for the project was job creation, supporting new and existing businesses, but also crucially to generate unrestricted income to support the ongoing operations of Mull and Iona Community Trust. So next slide, please. So March 2022, the site was full, 100% full, with a waiting list. That waiting list was something which drove us to seek another round of funding from Scottish Government. The success of the first phase of the project was recognised by the Regeneration Capital Grant Fund and by Harmons and Allen's Enterprise, who both chipped in significant contributions to phase two. But what stands out as different to phase two in terms of the funding package is that MICT ourselves were able to put in £183,000. And this comes about from our own community rewilding project at Ardura Community Forest, where we were very fortunate during the pandemic to secure an even higher price for the standing timber that was in Ardura when we bought it. So one effect of the pandemic was to drive up the cost of timber, and very fortuitously we benefited from that. So we've been able to plough back some of that into this community project. So this next phase is costing just over £1 million now, £1.08 million. Originally, the budget was exactly £1 million, but we encountered unanticipated ground conditions which cost us an extra £88,000. That problem is now behind us, and as you can see from the photograph, construction is proceeding apace. In fact, a lot of the cladding is now fitted to the building. Those 4 units have all been allocated in accordance with the allocation policy, and we've secured deposits from all those 4 tenants. So effectively, as soon as it's complete, Nullarbor Park is going to be full again. So we need to be looking for more capacity. So I made a comment a few minutes ago that we were slightly too conservative when we acquired the site in the first instance. I think if we had twice as much land in due course, we would be able to fill it as the gross domestic product that is being produced on the island increases apace, just to try to help improve the sustainability of the local economy and the local community. So next slide, please. So lack of key worker accommodation, and I stress here that the definition of worker accommodation in this context, we now tend to drop the word key and just use the phrase worker accommodation. We do make a distinction between worker accommodation and housing, whether it's affordable housing or market rate housing. We do make a distinction between that and worker accommodation. There is a definite need and demand on the island for short-term worker accommodation, whether it be for seasonal work for the hospitality sector, or whether it be stepping stone accommodation for managers, for employees, for staff being recruited to come and live on the island and work on the island, whilst they get their feet under the table and manage to secure, their own long-term home on the island. So, in a similar way to the Nullarbor Park project, what we've had to do is really to prove to the external stakeholders, to the government, to all the funders, we've had to prove that there is a need and demand for worker accommodation. And the two pieces of work that we've done have done that more than amply. The feasibility study that we did in 2022, which was done on our behalf by Community Enterprise, that demonstrated that there was a need for 260 beds as worker accommodation. Now, that might be 1 bed, 2 bed family houses. It's just quantifying the number of workers that would benefit from a project. So out of something like 1,200 properties on the island, you can appreciate that 260 is constraining the gross domestic product of the island quite significantly. It's constraining businesses, business confidence and business growth, and all the socioeconomic impacts that arise from that type of activity, from that business activity. We then carried out an economic impact analysis. This was done for us by Bigger Economics, and this came up with some astonishing figures for the gross value added that would arise if the businesses were unconstrained by the creation of the worker accommodation that we're looking to develop on the island. So next slide, please. Yeah, just to say before we just go back, please, before we go on to this slide, we are working quite closely with Argyll and Bute Council under the Rural Growth Deal, which is £25 million from UK, £25 million from Scottish Government. In our case, that's going to contribute something like £1.5 million to the first worker accommodation project on Mull, which is going to take place in Moray, on land which is owned by the council. The scheme, once it's completed, will include 12 two-bedroom units, and these might be two-bed units which are shared between complete strangers, or it might be for couples or small families to live in, just whilst they secure a permanent home on the island. The timescale for that project is looking to be under construction at the end of Q1 in 2024, and to be completed within about 12 months of them. So the next slide. Coming challenges. Those who know me well will know that I am very quickly frustrated by bureaucracy, frustrated by slow progress. The first point I've put on there as one of the challenges is hoping that eventually Scottish Government will recognise the contribution that is made to delivering the Scottish Government's outcomes, the contribution made by development trusts. Too often, I believe, legislation is formulated around local authorities, and in the case of housing, local authorities and RSLs, and with no mention at all of development trusts. So we're very active on the Isle of Mull and Iona, and there are lots of other development trusts around Scotland who are equally active in their areas, and organisations like Communities Housing Trust, which operate across the whole of Scotland. And we're all in the same boat when it comes to being excluded from new legislation being enacted to address the housing crisis. A couple of specific things on housing which are challenging for us, which we're trying to change. There is a Scottish Government scheme called Open Market Shared Equity. Apologies for the acronym there. OMSE is Open Market Shared Equity, which is a scheme whereby first-time buyers can apply for what's called a passport letter to then benefit from an open market shared equity scheme, which purchases part of the capital of a house that comes onto the market, effectively reducing the cost to the first-time buyer and making it affordable for them to live in. Doesn't work on any of the Argyll Islands, probably doesn't work on a lot of the other islands either, simply because of the house prices that are endemic in those local authority areas on which the open market shared equity scheme is based. So we're trying to develop our own scheme at the moment, which will work on Mull and Iona and achieve the same sort of benefits. Rural housing burdens are a much publicised remedy under Scottish legislation for trying to ensure that houses remain in perpetuity as the primary residence of people. But we're finding now that it's, along with Communities Housing Trust, we're finding it's difficult to secure mortgages on properties which have a rural housing burden on them. So unfortunately, at the moment, the rural housing burden as a solution is being emasculated by the lack of mortgage finance. And we're also finding that recent improvements to security of tenure for tenants by way of the landlord tenancies, the landlord legislation, is having an adverse effect on a number of property owners who are either moving out of long-term rentals, private rentals, or are not going into the private rental sector. One of the big challenges for the island is health and social care and a twin challenge of early years childcare. These are both issues which have come up on our community development plans and consultations with the wider community. And I could talk for a couple of hours really about both of those two subjects. Suffice to say that I think that there is an intervention needed from the third sector in the absence of solutions from the public and private sectors, neither of which seem able to grasp the nettle there. So there is a potential role for us as a third sector organisation on those issues. And I can just see that Ailsa's come back onto the screen, probably to give me a bit of a prod to stop. So that's my final slide, which is a view into one of our community transport vehicles saying thank you and goodbye.
Brilliant, Murray. That was a very polite prod. I hope I wasn't stern or anything, stern looking, but
Thank you.
thanks very much for that. And I suspect our following speakers will also share a lot of your frustrations, but I think the fact you've been doing it for 13 years and you're still there and you've still got the fire in your belly to keep going must say something about you, and all the great work that Mick's doing. And for those of you that don't know, there are three other organisations on Mull which have largely spun out and been inspired by what Mick have done over the last 26 years in the northwest and southwest Mull and round Toby Moray Harbour. So it's a very, very active place, Mull. But some really useful data there, particularly that 20 million GVA that could be achieved if we address the housing issue. So thanks, Murray. I'm going to pass over to Hugh and Angus from staffing. And I suspect Hugh could spend about 20 minutes talking about frustrations with Scottish Government policy in relation to housing. But I'll say just have your say, but then if you could get onto the other stuff as well, that would be great. Thanks very much.
Thank you, everybody. Good to kind of hear from Murray there. And I'll try and kind of keep our kind of bit quite concise. We're also a long-established community trust staffing. We're up in the northeast of Skye. You've probably seen the Oman Store, the Crang, Kiltrock, etc. That's the kind of landmarks that are up here. But there's a kind of living community here and has been for a long, long time. Staffing Trust was set up almost 30 years ago. It was 1994 it was set up. I was actually looking at the minutes of the very first meeting the other day because we're having a community consultation on Friday for our next for our 10-year plan. And you know how it came about was 1991 there was a census and staffing was the only community in Skye House which suffered a kind of severe population decline. There was a couple of lot of kind of alarm on the community council. But there was also a lot of frustration on the community council because of the, you know, it's obviously a political structure and it's quite rigid in terms of what it can and can't do. So they decided to look into kind of setting up a development trust and in 1994 that came into being. Like a lot of other kind of Highland communities, staffing were, a good distance away from services. We're actually further away from Inverness, which is our local authority kind of headquarters, than John O'Groats is. So that gives you an idea of how far we are away from, the kind of the admin kind of centre, also hospitals, etc. So we, as you say there, we've got, quite a strong kind of board of directors. Got a lot of McDonald's and stuff, and I'm not talking fast food places. We've got a good, strong kind of core of a couple of founding directors are still on the board, which is helpful, but we've also been adding kind of new people over the last few years. And we've had the prison governor, we've had builders, company directors, people working in education, teachers. We've had a whole range of kind of backgrounds and people that we can tap into. And, as I also said at the start of the seminar, community wealth building, I would say it's been kind of rooted in our community trust from kind of day one. We kind of are always trying to kind of use, locally kind of source kind of tradesmen, provide kind of services locally. And, we're demonstrating the kind of value to the public purse, which is obviously important for funders. But in terms of actually getting good value, we don't want to be kind of, developing and delivering projects, which then we need to bring in people from the mainland to kind of, manage and maintain those kind of assets that we kind of contribute to, that we've developed. So that's been an important kind of, part of the kind of ethos of the trust. And you see there, the last 10 years, it's been particularly busy the last 10 years, with community empowerment and actually buying land for the very first time and staffing. And the headline investment there is at 4.5 million. I mean, that's spread over, several different projects. But, after these projects are done, you don't get money for management and maintenance. And that's where, we're using our kind of community to kind of, to kind of help kind of service that. Angus will just talk a bit more about the specific projects, and I'll come back to you in a wee bit.
Thanks, Hugh. Yes, so I think Angus Murray, and I came to work for the Staffing Community Trust under its Sky Eco Museum project about 6 years ago. And really what that encompasses for the area, as it's a project that continues to evolve, but its premise is a dozen locations in the community, which we have gradually improved upon over a few years, which include very popular hill walking routes. Hugh mentioned the Star and the Kerrang, but there are also quite a few others that are lesser known. And the intentions of this project is to retain visitors into this community, and so that they spend a bit longer and get out of their cars and have a little bit of an explore. How that maximizes community benefit is that the intention there is that our visitors spend longer in this community, go into the kind of small shops, and generally just get to know the area a bit more. And also, it's been quite a big project in terms of community buy-in. We've totaled up about 100 contributors locally on the first phase of the Eco Museum project, which out of a community of 600 is obviously very, very high. And that includes working with the local schools on developing things like the information that we're presenting for visitors. As I mentioned as well, is that it's continued to evolve. It's a project that has looked to work in partnership with a lot of the public agencies in the local area, including the landowner, and has worked on things like improving the local environment. A path build is not just building the path. Some of these paths were originally designed for sort of 12,000 visitors a year, and now they're handling visitors of about 250,000. So there's been a lot of investment in the community. This is also included employing quite a lot of our local contractors, from local diggermen to local path workers to fencers and things like that. So it's had a lot of kind of buy-in, and that's really just and as I said, it's also done things like habitat restoration and important aspects for the sort of green economy as we move forward. A project that's sort of reaching a really good stage just now is we're nearing completion of an art sculpture at one of our major locations at Kiltrock, which is called Sul Nambra, which is the Eye of the Cornerstone. And that project is something that has been on the agenda of the Staff and Community Trust since its very first meeting, and it's sort of finally coming to exist. And that's been also been a very important project in terms of using local tradesmen and local materials as much as possible, and also doing things like involving education work with the local school. Moving on to what is now is now likely to be the biggest infrastructure project ever in Staffin, which is Staffin Harbour, which is likely to cost around about £5 million. And the intention of that project is to obviously support existing businesses like our various harbour users, from local fishermen and aquaculture business, and also to expand onto new users with marine new businesses, from things like marine tourism and anything else that comes out of a new harbour. So that's something that's obviously going to make a big difference when it comes to completion in this community. Also, for those familiar with the Staff and Community Trust, you maybe know about this project already, but last year we had a completion of our Iona project, which has been 6 affordable homes, a new health centre, and some business units in this community, and also included things like tree planting. So that's now reached a very good stage where it's been very actively used within by this community. So other than that, I'll move on to Hugh for the next slide.
I don't know what the kind of status of all the kind of attendees here are today, whether you're with a development trust at the very start of your journey, or you're kind of a bit further on than like we are. But you know, some of the challenges there, you know, the thing that has changed for our development trust in the last few years is, you know, we're buying land and now we're owning kind of properties and assets, and the kind of mindset has to change quite markedly from, you know, feasibility studies and consultation and, you know, working through planning, etc. So as I said earlier on, it's now about managing and maintaining kind of your assets. So you're obviously a development trust and we're a charity, but we have to think, you know, of our business heads on, and generating an income is kind of vital for the community trust. You know, so that we're here in the future and we're able to kind of manage these assets for the community. You know, increased financial pressures as a result of these assets. For example, you know, we're now facing a £10,000 a year accountancy bill for our kind of audited kind of accounts, which we never had until we were a charity with a kind of income of more than £500,000. That's directly down to getting capital grants for kind of housing and harbour projects. Our insurances now are over £5,000. Some of that is kind of met with income from our housing and business premises, but it's you know, these are the kind of challenges that, you know, development trusts at our stage are kind of facing. We're still kind of partially grant funded, and that's obviously, you know, a risk down the line if, you know, if HIE or Born Gaelic or, you know, the lottery kind of you know, withdraw funding, it can make things very difficult for us. But generally, you know, we've got kind of a good kind of in with the community here. We've got good, strong relationships with the other organisations and with the various kind of crofting townships here. And, you know, the kind of new projects that we're looking at, you know, and hopefully we'll get more on Friday. I'm sure we will, proposals that will certainly keep us busy for the next kind of 10 years and beyond. And happy to take questions afterwards.
Brilliant, thanks Hugh and Angus. Yeah, and I think that last point you're making there about how community development trusts, once you get past the development stage, you've got to really put your business heads on. And I suspect that perhaps a lot of organisations, particularly public sector organisations, don't realise what sort of an impactful local business now many development trusts are running. I mean, Murray talked about 25 employees, which I imagine is quite a big number for an organisation on Mix. I know on Egg we employ sometimes up to 14 employees, which out of 120 population is quite significant. So we need to start talking and developing that narrative about the importance of the businesses that community development trusts manage. And I think the other thing I really took away, obviously the whole issue about trying to use local labour and skills and making sure as much of that money sticks locally, isn't extracted. But that increase in visitor numbers, which I suspect we all know about, Sky, but it's actually really stark. And I think the work that the Staff and Community Trust have been able to do in terms of managing those visitor numbers and ensuring that the impact is minimised as far as possible, but that capital and revenue stays locally, again, is something that other development trusts can really be thinking about. So for the last presentation, I'm going to pass over to Lindsay Chalmers, who's based down in South Cowal. A lot of you will know Lindsay. She's our development manager, but she's also been heavily involved with the acquisition and development of a shop down in South Cowal. So a completely different type of asset, but I think in terms of the whole sort of putting your business head on approach, I'm sure that's what Lindsay would say has been absolutely critical to running the new shop and other assets they've got down there. Thanks, Lindsay.
Thanks, Ailsa. I'll just share my slides. So really inspiring to hear from staff and Mull and Iona about what could be possible for us in the future. In South Cowal, I'd say we're still very much at the early days. We've not been running our asset for very long, but we're hearing lots of ideas from the local community about what more we could be doing in the future. So just to tell you a little bit about us, because it's an area that lots of people have not yet been to. We are in the area between Dunoon and Rothesay, so this peninsula that's bordered by the Firth of Clyde on one side and Loch Striven on the other side. We have 1,600 people spread out over 16 miles, but the majority of the population is in the two villages of Inellin and Toward. It's a really unusual area. Up until the 1850s, most people in the area lived on the west side, on the Loch Striven side. But in the 1850s, lots of rich Glaswegians decided this would be a great place for them to go and spend their downtime. So on the peninsula, we've got lots of big villas that were built by rich Glaswegians in the late 19th century. And as a result, we've got croquet lawns, we have conservatories, we have stables, all of these things you'd not think would be really important to the local economy nearly 200 years later. And I'll go on and explain a bit about that in a minute. Up until the 1950s, the tourism industry was the really important part of the economy here. I can't say this term because I'm from the East Coast, not the West Coast, but everyone talks about down the water. The people from Glasgow would come here and spend their holidays. They would come down on steamships. But when all the holidays to Spain and everything started to take off, then the tourist industry went into kind of major spiral of decline here and has now almost completely disappeared. But we've been left with some real assets in the area that we can build on. So what do we have in our area? We have a naval base where ships from the UK and US come and refuel and restock. We have the ubiquitous fish farm, and we also have the ubiquitous Russian oligarch who owns a lot of land in this area. There's been some major pushes over the years to have big economic projects happening in this area. So I think it was the 1970s, they built a big industrial area down on the bottom of the peninsula to build oil rigs, but it didn't take off, and that site is still sitting there with nothing happening. So there's not really an appetite in the area for any kind of major economic projects. That's what we found when we've been talking to the local community. Instead, people want us to build on our area. It's still a really beautiful area, and there's loads of potential to develop more tourism businesses. What we found with all the stables and conservatories and everything, and unlike Mull and Staffin, we have very low house prices here. So what's happened is that a lot of small businesses have moved into the area, developing things like potteries, jewellery businesses, well-being businesses, operating out of all these kind of random buildings we have in the area. We're also very lucky that we've got really good Wi-Fi here. So we've seen a lot of people moving here, setting up their own businesses, we've got young families. It's a great quality of life. Our school roll is going up. So there's already a kind of thriving local business community that we could build on. Back in 2017, the community flagged up that there were real concerns that our local shop and post office would close. Lots of our local businesses make money out of taking orders online and then posting things out to their customers. So it was going to be really tricky for them if the only post office in the area closed down. So at that point, we started the process of buying the shop and post office and the flat above the shop, which we've now turned into a self-catering business. I would say here the local businesses and the community are all very intertwined. So it was local businesses that came on our committee when we were looking to buy the shop. They donated their time, they donated items so we could do fundraising in the early days. They bought community shares and we did a community share offer. So there's not a kind of separation between us as a community owned organisation and local businesses. Is extremely intertwined with each other. So we've always been really keen to support local businesses. We've done the obvious things, maybe like increasing the amount of local produce in the shops. What I would say about this is it's not just good for bringing money in, it's created a real sense of community and a sense of place. And every time we talk to people who live locally, this is the one thing they talk about, how much they love all local produce in the shop. So we've got baking from micro businesses, we've got eggs from local farms, venison, ghee, milk. We've got an arts area in the shop where a lot of local businesses can display their produce. We have books from local authors, and we always look for opportunities where we could outsource services to local people. So we used to make our own rolls and things in the shop, and now we've outsourced that to a local business. Our self-catering flat is also, the running of that is outsourced to a local business as well. We have loads of ideas for increasing the amount of local produce in the shop. My idea is to build a zip line from here to Butte so I could get croissants over from the Syrian bakery. Sadly, never come to fruition, but I do sometimes get the Butte gin accidentally delivered to my house. So there is an upside to being a committee member of a community shop. We've tried to be really creative about how we support local businesses as well. So we've sold vouchers in the shop. So if you want to buy a Christmas present for someone, you could buy a well-being experience for someone, a massage, Reiki from local businesses. And you can only buy those vouchers in our community shop. Last year, we got some funding from the lottery to deliver classes. So again, we tried to involve businesses as much as possible in that. So we're working with local businesses to develop classes. So we've got local photographers, potters, so we can run pottery classes, photography classes. We also knew there was people in the community who were really interested in setting up their own businesses, but weren't sure if there was a market there. So we're helping them to set up their classes as well, and they can test things out with the local community to see if there's interest. Over the last couple of years, we've been really fortunate to get high support for South Kildare community enterprises. So there hadn't really been anything in the area before. There'd been a development trust, but there hadn't really been anything that High could support. So at the moment, they fund us for a half-time development officer, and that's been a huge benefit to the committee because running a shop, our shop is quite big. It's open 7 days a week. It's got staff. It's got high footfall. That in itself can take a lot of time to run. The margins are very tight in community shops, so we always have to be keeping an eye on our own business as well. So it's been a huge help to us to have this extra capacity from the high-funded development officer. And now she's looking at developing new projects. So we've got 2 pubs in the area. We used to have 2 cafes, but the people who ran them retired. So every time we do a consultation, people say, we really need to have a cafe. We've got more kids living here now. There's nowhere for parents to take their children if they want to have a coffee and a cake. So again, we're looking for opportunities to work with other organisations in the area to develop that business rather than doing it ourselves. And in the long term, we have aspirations to try and bring some of the love back to the tourism industry in the area. A lot of our self-catering businesses closed down during COVID, and I think there's a feeling from most people here that they'd like to see a bit of a revival of the tourism industry, and so that more people know about what an amazing place South Kildare is. So that's something that's kind of our long-term aspiration. But I think whatever we do, local business is always going to be at the heart of our plans and development. Thank you.
Thanks, Lindsay. That was great. A completely different asset talking about there, obviously, but that whole focus on not displacing local businesses is absolutely critical. So I'm just going to come to a few questions now. I think let's have a look. We've got a Q&A. So from Matthew, do any of the speakers have advice for increasing appetite for community engagement volunteering for a community project in the very early stages? Murray's typing his answer. So while Murray's typing his answer, I'm going to come to Hugh and Angus. Right, community projects in early stages. How do you encourage more people to get involved?
It's a good question, Ailsa. I think generally how it happens in our board is some directors will be more interested in specific projects and will take a real lead on them and get involved in the steering group. And you know, a steering group is obviously a smaller group who are kind of like focused on that project, whereas others will be involved in something slightly different. And then when we're kind of developing the project or doing feasibility, you'll get other people of the community who are maybe not on the board, but they're interested in the actual project. So I suppose it's down to the actual project. If the project has something that is appealing to people in the community, then they're going to get involved. And the consultation we're doing on the Friday is about having a new blueprint for the next 10 years. So the projects have come from the community initially. You know, it's not the trust board saying, right, let's do this. So if there's a bit of imagination from the community and what projects they want to see delivered, generally we find that, you know, that'll kind of whet people's appetite and they'll get involved. And then we don't really seem to lose many people so far.
I can just add to that is a good example from the activities side from the Eco Museum. We got our local fishing competition going again a few years ago, and we're holding it annually. And a lot of the volunteers involved in that are now involved in the capital works for the major harbour project. So it's like they got involved on the basis of you know, a kind of quite a fun odd one day in summer, and then before they know it, they're fully committed to regular meetings over the whole winter. So sort of
that's when we make them we make them sign commitment in blood then, Ailsa. So.
Well, that's obviously you. So you take a commitment in blood, and Murray looks like he bribes them with curry and pizza. So, Matthew, there's a couple of suggestions there as to how you might take that forward. Lindsay, how have you found sort of getting volunteers? Because your project is obviously much earlier than Staffin's and Mull's.
Well, in the early days, I think we found often different opportunities because we quite realised not everyone wanted to come onto a steering group or a board, but there's loads of other things we could get people involved in. So when we did the community share offer, we trained up lots of like community share ambassadors, and you could stop any of those people when you're out for a walk and ask them questions about community shares. And we got loads of volunteers for that. And more recently, we found that if we put out a general call for volunteers, no one will come forward. So the more specific we can be and the more variety we can have in different roles, the more people we get engaged. And over the last year, we have massively increased the number of volunteers just from that being much more focused and having open days where people can come along and ask questions. And we've also got WhatsApp groups as well. So if we need a general volunteer for something, we can put a call out and people seem to like that. So I think, yeah, just be really specific about what you're looking for. That makes a huge difference.
Yeah, and appeal, as you say, to people's individual interests. So, because not many people find committee meetings as thrilling as I do, obviously. So I'm going to come back to Murray. So in terms of what you're doing now, Murray, do you think that's what the original founders of MICT envisaged you might be doing 25 years on? If not, what's changed on Mull over that period that's required you to expand your operations in the way that you have? Because you give us a huge list of things that you're involved with. Do you think they would have been in the original vision of the founders?
Well, I know for sure that they are, because this is a yellowed copy of a newspaper that was produced in October 1997. So this was produced by it was actually a Gaelic language newspaper, but they did a special English language edition, which was after the Coram Trust carried out their island-wide community consultation, the recommendation of which was to form Mull Community Trust. It's quite sad if I look through that newspaper. Effectively, there is a very, very accurate mapping of the priorities from 1997 to the priorities in 2023. The one glaring addition to that priority list is broadband and mobile phone connectivity, which of course didn't exist in the same way that it does nowadays back in 1997. Everything else on there is just the same today as it was in 1997. So I'm very confident that the founders of Mull and Iona Community Trust would be supporting what we're currently doing. In fact, I beat myself up with a birch stick sometimes, thinking, why the hell have we not fixed housing yet?
Yeah, that's an existential question, I think, Moray. And as good as you are, and your commitment over 13 years, even we can't put that all down to you. I think there's other figures to be involved in that. But I mean, housing's been a big issue in Skye as well, hasn't it? And you've got one project under your belt. You're about to launch another one. Do you think housing was sort of in the purview of the original founders of the trust as being absolutely central to delivering this economic development that you're involved in now?
It's a good question, Elsa. The thing I would say that the founder director said to me a few years ago when we bought the housing site for Terry and Castle was they never felt that they were going to be an organisation which actually bought land and developed projects and built buildings. They kind of felt that they were there to facilitate kind of, helping the economy, helping these things happen. But with community empowerment, the right to buy, the kind of the land fund, organisations like yourself and DTAS being there to provide support for the community. So that gave the Staff and Trust a kind of confidence that it never really had before. I would say in the first kind of 7 or 8 years that the trust was kind of I'm not trying to diminish what they were doing, but a bit more light touch. And that's now changed to having, they never thought they would have staff. They thought it would be an organisation which supported activities, etc. So that's been a big kind of sea change for the trust, and how it goes from now is as I say, the big kind of challenge. It's not just ourselves that are facing this, but we've gone through quite a rapid transformation. We've got 2 full-time members of staff. We're about to recruit a harbour manager. We've got 2 or 3 kind of self-employed people that are specific to our project. So our kind of workforce is kind of growing. But it's once these projects are delivered and how they're kind of managed properly is going to be the next challenge. And will it be a good use of resources for the Staff and Trust to actually deliver the housing itself, or tap into its partners to do that? That's a big question for the board.
Yeah, okay, thanks for that. I suppose that comes on to this whole issue, which I think Moray brought up in his presentation as well, about volunteer fatigue and actually needing staff to deliver some of these projects. And it's unrealistic to expect volunteers as committed and skilled as they are to actually deliver big capital projects. So I've got a question in the chat, which is sort of linked to that. And then I'm going to come back to you, Lindsay, about some of the issues that you've had. So Sandra McCaskill, Moray, asked Moray about how they got funding to evidence that need. So Murray's put in the Q&A responses. It's been funded by various organisations, so Royal and Islands Housing Fund, Scottish Land Fund, National Community Lottery Fund, and then they also were able to fund some of the work themselves through their Ardura timber income. So there is funds out there. I think we all know they're probably getting fewer and fewer and more constrained in terms of the terms, but in terms of evidencing need, then yeah, if anyone's got any queries on that, then do come back to CLS and we can point you in the right direction. But coming back to Lindsay, a question for you. You're running a business that's quite impactful locally, but it's quite a small business. And how have you found issues with sort of volunteer fatigue and with attracting staff and retaining staff and managing staff? And is there anything you would do differently if you were doing it again?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of work. Like, to be on the committee of a community shop sounds like, well, someone said I've always dreamed about owning a sweet shop, and this is the closest I can get. So that will get you so far, but it's still a huge amount of work. And when you're running a business, it's serious work as well. You're employing people. There's lots of people in our area who are really dependent on the shop because Dunoon is too far away for them to go and do their groceries. So it is a huge responsibility for people. And I think from our point of view, I mean, I've just stepped down from the committee myself recently. I'm still talk to them all the time, but we're at that moment now where we set up, we ran a business, really challenging. The pandemic arrived 3 months after we purchased the shop, then the cost of living crisis. There's a real desire in the community and the committee to be able to do much bigger projects and do local economic regeneration. So we're feeling all this pressure on the organisation to do that. But if we take our focus away from keeping the shop afloat, then, you know, then nobody wants that to happen either. So I think that balance between kind of keeping your current businesses running and being able to do the bigger picture stuff can be really challenging, something we see all the time at Community Land Scotland. So, you know, just getting that half post from highs made a huge difference. But I think there's loads more we could do if we were able to tap into funding, because there's definitely a demand locally for us to be doing that work. And I would say our type of organisations are really good value for money in making that happen. I'm sure Highlands Land Enterprise are really aware of that. The money they invest in us, as you know, they get really good returns from that.
No, brilliant. And that sort of comes to my last question, just conscious of time. So I'm going to ask you each the same question. I'll come to Hugh and Angus first. What does community wealth building as a model mean to you? And cynically, is it just more jargon to justify volunteer-led communities having to deliver more with less? Or is it more than that? And how do we shape the agenda so it's properly transformational? So big question there. Hugh and Angus, I'll come to you, then I'll come to Lindsay, and I'll come to Moray last. So time to think about it. Thanks, Hugh and Angus.
I would say it is jargon, Ailsa, but it's helpful jargon in the sense that it's being recognised now by governments in the private and public sector, and you know, it's a good way of measuring, you know, the impact and the contribution to, you know, the communities from development trusts that, you know, we didn't have before. I think well, I started 9 years ago with the trust, and you know, community empowerment legislation was quite fresh then, and there was a kind of I suppose a slightly condescending kind of perception amongst a lot of the public sector towards development trusts, and you know it's volunteers, and I noticed they would call us a group instead of a development trust. You know, like they were, you know, it was like you know, a small kind of thing, and we've just kind of felt that, you know, over the last few years, you know, developing and delivering the projects, that kind of perception's changed. I think some of the officers kind of, you know, found that from, you know, their direct dealings with the board and the staff, that we're not here just for, you know, a bit of fun. You know, that the community development world, it's not kind of small beer, it's, you know, multi-million-pound developments. I'd be intrigued if, you know, just in Skye alone, if we totaled up all you know, the projects and you know, what the contribution to the community would be quite incredible. And that's just the kind of headline stuff. So, you know, as I was saying, I keep banging on about management and maintenance, but for example, our housing development now, you know, we've got kind of, you know, for example, we needed a local tradesman to put in a bit of fencing to stop cattle getting in. We had a whirly gig that got hit by the wind, so we had a joiner, you know, fixing that for us. We're not phoning people in Inverness to come through here to do that. We're using local people. Another example was we put a electricity line to the harbour last week. It finished and it was 1 kilometre long, but we've got a historic dike here which had to be opened up and reinstated for the machine to come through. But we've got a chap here from Cumbria who's, you know, experienced kind of stonemason, and he did a brilliant job on that. So I suppose it's really, you know, it's very much in action, but you know, we kind of need to shout a bit more about, you know, the contribution to the economy, because the kind of challenge is that we're all kind of heads down, we're kind of busy with what we're doing, but we kind of need organisations like, you know, Community Land Scotland and DTAS to, you know, help us get that message across. And it's kind of filtering down, you know, the politicians are kind of recognising that, but you know yourselves, it's, you know, down to the kind of local authority officers and all that. It's trying to change that kind of mindset, we feel.
Yeah. No, thanks, Hugh. I don't think there's anything I would disagree with in there, particularly not about community development as being small beer anymore. Lindsay.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with anything Hugh has just said either. I think if you worked in this sector for a long time, you can get a bit weary of like bandwagons coming along, but I think community wealth building is a bandwagon we should maybe get on, because it feels like it usually resonates with everything we do every day in community land world. I think we've as a sector, have been doing a lot of this work for years. It never ceases to amaze me the scale of projects that our members are taking on, especially when they're driven by volunteers and people willing to learn, you know, usually technical information about running a harbour or how to repair a wind turbine. Or I think, you know, we try and get that news out there to politicians and the wider public, but I think there's always more we can be doing to kind of raise awareness of that, because what our members do is pretty mind-blowing, really.
No, thanks, Lindsay. Absolutely. I was just thinking, should we call him the old hand or the elder statesman of this discussion, given his 13 years? Murray, what's your final thoughts on this? Community wealth building.
Just give me the question again, because I was typing an answer to the into one of the Q&As.
Don't worry. What does community wealth building as a model mean to you? Is it just more jargon to justify volunteer-led communities having to deliver more with less? How do we shape the agenda so it's properly transformational?
What does it mean? It is a bit of jargon, to be frank. However, I think the important thing is trying to get the message through to stakeholders and decision makers, you know, that there is a role to play by the local communities, and I think this is echoing what everybody else has said. There is a role for us to play that is largely unrecognised. Many of the officers at our local authority are just so wrapped up in the fact that they are under-resourced and under pressure. They're so wrapped up in that fact that they cannot recognise the opportunity that is sometimes presented to them for a development trust like us to help with their problem, because we want to solve the problem for our community, which they're unable to. So sometimes they just cannot recognise that and grasp that as an opportunity. I suspect in some cases they're not empowered to do so. They're just told to get on with their job and not to ask questions or challenge the status quo. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think we've all probably suffered a bit from that sort of factionalism and that wanting to retain power, particularly at local authority level, and particularly that fight for resources, and the feeling that if development trusts are funded, then that will automatically take away from local authorities. And I think that's a job for us all to do, to say exactly as you said there, Murray, that it's actually about adding extra value to what they can do, actually delivering it in a more cost-effective and impactful way, which we know is not always possible. So I'm going to finish up there. I think we've got one other question. I don't know if it's a question. Oh no, thanks, John Watson. So thanks very much to our speakers today, to Murray, and you can tell him in Glasgow, Murray, to Hugh and Angus and to Lindsay, and for everyone joining us today. Hopefully that's been a useful session and given you some ideas as to what communities are doing in terms of supporting local businesses and building community wealth. It is a big part of the Scottish Government agenda. How much of it is jargon, we'll need to wait and see. But there's certainly lots of areas that we can really promote what development trusts are doing, and hopefully we'll get some positive response from that. So thanks everyone for your time. Thanks to the speakers. Thanks to Meg for all the backroom support. We've had an issue with our chat function today. I think it's because Zoom's reset something. I clearly don't understand it, but anyway, thanks. Murray, did you just want to come in quickly?
No, I was just trying to find the icon for clapping my hands.
That's fine though, jazz hands. Okay, nice to see everybody. See you soon. Thanks again.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.